an error variance, margin of error on their estimates, but the margin is pretty small. It's actually analogously with the Holocaust deniers who say, look, these different historians are giving different numbers for the numbers of Jews killed during World War II. This guy says it was 5.2 million. This guy says it was 6.1 million. That guy says it's 6.9 million. These guys can't get their stories straight. I don't think anybody was killed actually like this. Well, okay, if these historians working in different universities and doing different counting techniques, like how many people lived in that village in 1939, how many were left in 1946 when they were liberated, how many were shipped out, and so on, they have all these records. And they can actually make a pretty good count. But of course they're not perfect, nobody's there with a counter, so they all have slightly different numbers for each of those little villages, and those numbers add up to different totals. Now if they all came in exactly the same, then I would be suspicious. Okay, these guys are just reading each other's literature, or they're copying, or there's something weird going on. And the same is true with scientists. That is, if they all came up with the exact same number, then I'd be suspicious. The fact that they vary a little bit, they argue amongst themselves, and they try to debunk each other's techniques for coming up with these things tells us evolutionary theory is provisionally true because it explains how design happened naturally from the bottom up. It's convergent, all these independent lines of inquiry jump to the same conclusion, evolution happened, and it predicts new findings that have been confirmed empirically. So it's natural design, not intelligent design, evolution, not creation. So let's turn to the actual arguments themselves, and then we'll take some questions. So a few minutes on this. Dembski is their head guy, Bill Dembski. His book, Design Revolution. Although he has quite a few books. He's a nice guy, super smart guy. He's got 2 PhDs, twice as many as me, so he must be really smart. I think he actually has a master's also in theology. Anyway, so he writes, intelligent design is a strictly scientific theory devoid of religious commitments, whereas the creator underlying scientific creationism conforms to a strict literalist interpretation of the Bible. The designer underlying intelligent design need not even be a deity. Well, this is my opening to say, you mean it could be an alien? And he says, well, yes, it could be. I say, and do you think it's an alien? Well, I'm not going to judge it on that issue. No, but what do you think? No, I don't think it's an alien. I said, I didn't think you thought so either, and none of them do. Of course, we know what they think it is. Why is he writing this? The reason he's writing this is because they're trying to get rid of the old, younger creationists. He writes, thus in this relation to Christianity, intelligent design should be viewed as a ground-clearing operation that gets rid of the intellectual rubbish that for generations has kept Christianity from receiving serious consideration. So before these guys in the 1990s, most of their literature was published by Christian publishing houses or self-published, and not by university presses, not by mainstream New York publishing houses, and so they're trying to change that. They want to go mainstream. That's what all fringe groups do. They want to go mainstream and be taken seriously. And so that's what the new intelligent design movement is all about. In fact, they call it the wedge. Philip Johnson, retired UC Berkeley law professor, calls this movement the wedge. The objective, he said, is to convince people that Darwinism is inherently atheistic, thus shifting the debate from creationism versus evolution to the existence of God versus the non-existence of God. From there, people are introduced to the truth of the Bible, and then the question of sin, and finally, they're introduced to Jesus. So this is the agenda. This is, I told you at the beginning, this is what they're concerned about. This is where they eventually want to take this, all the way to the Supreme Court, literally changing the seats there. In fact, as Johnson said, Christians in the 20th century have been playing defense. They've been fighting a defensive war to defend what they have, to defend as much of it as they can, and it never turns the tide. What we're trying to do is something entirely different. We're trying to go into the enemy territory at their very center and blow up the ammunition dump. What is the ammunition dump? It's their version of creation. So, it matters. Really it does. As he said, this isn't really and never has been a debate about science. It's about religion and philosophy. It's that worldview thing. This is what they care about. Well, okay, so we begin with a serious problem with their agenda. That is trying to find the intelligent designer. Well, if the world is complex and looks intricately designed, and therefore the best inference is that there must be an intelligent designer, by the same logic, we should infer that an intelligent designer must itself have been designed by a superior intelligent designer. And by the same course of reasoning, any designer who can create a superior intelligent designer must himself be a super superior intelligent designer, which itself was created by a super duper superior intelligent designer. Okay, now to be fair, Dembski's response to this is, well, you have to stop the causal chain somewhere. Yeah, but why stop at the very first causal mechanism? I mean, maybe there's one more and one more by that very set of arguments. So, for example, I argue in a little half tongue-in-cheek, oops, I went too far, essay I wrote in Scientific American called Shermer's Last Law, because you shouldn't name laws after yourself. Some people do. That is, any sufficiently advanced extraterrestrial intelligence is indistinguishable from God. Okay, let's say we find out that life was seeded on Earth from the Vegans, because I'm pretty sure I saw a Star Trek with the planet Vega in there somewhere. Maybe it was the star Vega or something. Anyway, and let's say they came here, you know, 1 billion years ago, and they seeded life with RNA, and that gave rise to DNA or something like that. And we found the plans, the blueprints in a pod out in Blight somewhere, the desert in Kansas, something. And so, wow, what an incredible discovery. Life was seeded here by the Vegans. Well, that would just beg the question, that's really interesting, but where did the Vegans come from? Did they evolve on that planet? No, it turns out we discovered 1 million years from now that they were seeded there by the Andromedans from the galaxy Andromeda. Well, that's interesting, but where did the Andromedas come from? Did they evolve in the galaxy there somewhere on the planet? Or were they seeded from, you see where that goes. At some point, you can't just keep invoking some more intelligent seeding process. Somebody had to do it from the bottom up. And that's the best you can hope for, is to find really smart genetic engineers that are able to do this. Well, we're practically able to do this already, just with 50 years of practice. Give us 500 years. I mean, J. Craig Bettner is practically on the verge of, in his lab, creating, you know, life in a test tube, right? It's pretty close. But let's say he doesn't make it, but give him 500 years, 5,000 years, 50,000 years. Chances of us encountering an extraterrestrial who's exactly the same parallel evolution culturally and biologically as us is virtually zero, right? I mean, they're either going to be way ahead of us or way behind us. They're not going to be like with the Roswell story. You know, they crashed in Roswell, and we back-engineered their advanced technology. We got silicon chips just slightly better than vacuum tubes. Wait, the aliens managed to cross the vast distances of interstellar space in these super deluxe spacecraft, and they're just like 5 years ahead of us technologically? That's it? I mean, we already have iPads and iPhones, and I mean, you know, we're way ahead of that already. So whatever they're going to be, and by the way, they're not likely to be bipedal primates with gnarly stuff on their forehead speaking English with an Indian accent. That's not probably the way they're going to look. Hardly any other life forms on Earth look like that, let alone from another planet. So here's your 3 best arguments: irreducible complexity, the design inference with its explanatory filter, and then the fine-tuned and probing principle. So, irreducible complexity cannot arise by a gradual process of incremental complexity. All its parts must be together to work, so it must have been the result of an intelligent design. Irreducible complexity. Like a mousetrap, you have to have all 5 parts at work, or it won't catch mice for you. Oh yeah? Well, somebody's showing how you can do it with 4 parts, 3 parts, 2 parts, and even 1 part. Just because the ideas can't figure out how it happened doesn't mean it can't happen. This was, I think this was another J.B.S. Haldane quote. Evolution is smarter than you. It's got 1 billion years of practice, experiments. So say, for example, the problem of incipient stages, what good is half a wing? So this was an argument put forth by St. George Beebart in his book, The Origin of Genesis of Species, meant as a critique of Darwin's Origin of Species, in which he presented this problem of incipient stages. I could see what good a full aerodynamic wing would be, escaping predators, capturing prey, and so forth. But what good would half a wing do, or 10% of a wing? How do you get from 0 wing, a nub, to a fully aerodynamic structure if at each stage it has to have some adaptive purpose to it? It has to be slightly better than the previous one. And you're not going to get flight with a really nice nub. It's got to be a full-on wing. Well, Darwin's answer to this, it turns out probably the right one, is that those incipient stages were not poorly designed wings. They were well-designed something else. They were simply used for something else and then co-opted later. So it's probably an acceptation as Gould called it, or just co-opted, just later co-opted. So, for example, in one